Hey everybody, this is George Uno again with REIClub, and today I'm bringing you our first episode in this series that we're calling The Intersection of First and Worst. So I'm bringing on really big real estate developers, really big investors, people who have done the business for a few years and have some really good stories to tell because that's what I think we're all here for. And so they're going to be telling us about their first deal. What did it look like? How did they get into it? What were they doing before they were a real estate investor? And then I want to bring them around kind of full circle and tell us about their worst deal. And for some people, that may just be, if they're lucky, that may just be them telling their first deal all over again in a little more gory detail. But we want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly, and we want to learn from that as investors. And we want to make sure we don't make those same mistakes. So my guest today is David Richter. He is the founder of Simple CFO, which provides fractional CFO solutions for real estate investors, especially, and helps them manage to profit first, is what he calls it. And he's got an entire book on the subject, and he's all about making sure that you're not just working your business, making a bunch of money, and then losing track of where it goes, that you're actually taking profit home, because I think that's kind of what we're all looking for when we get into business. So with that, David, how are you doing? Where are you located?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm in sunny Orlando, Florida, so that's where I'm living these days.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, let's get right to it. Why don't you tell us about your life before real estate investing and then kind of how your first deal came about?
So, I got into real estate investing right after college. So, before real estate investing, I was in college and high school and, just normal stuff there. And someone gave me Rich Dad Poor Dad in college. That's what set me on the real estate path. And so I'll just jump into that first deal because I had read a bunch of books up to that point. I'm like, I'm just itching to get a deal. And I bought my first house on 12/12/12. I'll never forget that date. So it was a great date to buy real estate. And it was also, if you remember, 2009 till probably like 13, 14, like the properties were just a dime a dozen, like on the MLS and on HUD Home Store. So this one I bought
Mm.
from the MLS for a very reasonable price, put some work into it right away, and then actually did three different things with it. I, number one, rented it before I lived in it, so I got some cash flow right away, and I loved the taste of cash flow. That was an awesome thing, like to have. Then I actually lived in it, so I was able to actually, the fruits of the labor of pouring into this property, whereas I actually able to live there as the first house with my wife. Then from there, 2 years later, we moved out of that property, and then I was able to lease option the property. So I was able to straight rent it, live in it, and then did a lease option where I found through a guy who would screen tenants. I paid him to screen some of the tenants, in applications. Found super tenant. This guy paid early. He made sure that the payments were in, like automatically. Then 6 months into our lease option agreement, he exercised the option and cashed me out. So there I was. My first deal was a home run because I had rented it, gotten several $1,000s like before I moved in, lived in it for 2 years, which if you know the tax code, if you live somewhere for 2 out of 5 years, when you sell the property, there's no capital gains tax. So when I exercised that lease option with that tenant and he bought me out, I got a lump sum tax free. I'm like, bam, I love real estate. So that first deal was a home run. And the only thing I can attribute it to was not my excessive genius, because I'm not an excessive genius. It was more that I had good people around me and I had read a lot of the books, a lot of the mistakes, what not to do. And then I went to people and said, "Is this a good deal? Like, this is what I'm securing it at. This is what I'm rehabbing at. Like, I'm watching other people do lease options here. Like, should I do that here instead of just straight rental when I, move out of the property?" So there was a lot of good people I had in my life too. So getting mentors around me, to do that first deal. So that was the first deal, which it couldn't have gone any better than it did. And like I said, it was probably because of a lot of the forces around me, being able to bounce things off of them and, being able to have those people in my corner. You want me to go to my worst deal now? Because
Well,
I
hold on.
definitely have a worst deal.
Oh,
So,
good, good. Well, let me stop you on the first deal here. Man, it sounds like maybe a little bit of excessive genius with the 2 year rule, for your primary residence and avoiding those capital gains taxes. What were you studying in college before you got into
I
this?
had to teach like
Okay.
secondary education. So, I wasn't. I wasn't going to college for to be an entrepreneur or business owner. I thought I would teach people, which is what I end up doing today and spreading the message of, profit first around the country. So, but now I'm using it more than I was when I first jumped into real estate. So that's what I was in college for.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, all right. Well, you kind of teased it. Let's get into that worst deal. I can't wait for this one.
Okay. Now the worst deal while we were doing when you're doing 30 deals a month, like you can probably have a good worst story here. There is one where an employee of the company where he bought the property, was going to fix it up, but like a lot of contractors ran out of money for that project and started using, got off of that project and then started using the money that was for that project for other projects, and like this project just sat there for a long time without any money going into it, even though there was money being allocated for it. So there wasn't good oversight there. Then it turns out that it was in Illinois, which is not the most landlord or like entrepreneur friendly state. So it turns out that their city, there was a bunch of ordinances. Well, then when another team finally took over, because like that guy like left the company, it was like a big deal, big ordeal. Well, then another team takes it over and they start fixing it up like they're actual, honest, legitimate people. Well, they start fixing it up, and then the basement keeps flooding, and like all these the worst things imaginable you can think can happen on this house are happening. And it turns out this is like a property in our portfolio for like 2.5, 3 years when it should have taken like 3 to 6 months to flip it and then sell it. And the company ended up losing over $200,000 on this one deal. So that was the worst deal I've ever seen. But thankfully, the owner, like we were doing so many deals, it hurt and it hurt bad, but it didn't tank us at that point either. So it was like we were almost relieved. Like this was the worst. This is the deal from hell. Like, can we please get away from this as fast as possible? And it was almost like a big weight off everyone's shoulders once that property finally closed, even though it was a horrible, horrible deal and a horrible turnout of that property. So yeah, that was the worst deal I've seen, and why I want to make sure people are not just buying properties because they need to, or because they're going, living in their rat race. But yeah, that was the worst one I've seen.
That one sounds pretty painful. So you kind of touched on the lack of oversight on that one. That's kind of where things like spiraled out of control for you. Is that kind of
Yeah.
where you got the this idea of profit first? Would that have how would that have changed things if you had it
Right.
way back then?
If we would have had a system to manage the money and know it as the entrepreneurs, like if the owner would have had a very clear view of where all the money's going, I think he would have had a much bigger wake up call earlier and some red flags for that property specifically, to be able to. So it wasn't just that property. I mean, the whole business as a whole. Like some months we would do 25 deals in a month, but we'd be spending like 26, 27. It's like it's that constant that we're making a lot of money, but we're also spending as much as we're making or more. So that's where I really saw it, and properties like that contributed to it. And it's just like if we would have had better, clearer oversight, then I would have saw. I just literally was on the phone with someone like an hour ago, and they were almost head in hands. Like if I just know, I just want to know where my numbers are. Like, what am I making, spending, and keeping? Like those simple numbers. And if we would have just had that back then, of like, okay, for the properties, for our business overall, like just having this clear view of where the cash is too, because like what your numbers say on the books is sometimes a lot different than what the money is in the bank. So if we would have had like a system to manage the cash, it probably would have been a much different story. And I might not be here talking with you on this podcast if we would have managed it correctly, because that team there had a lot of good people on there. Not just because, not saying that egotistically, like I was contributing to that. It was more that there was a bunch of A team players on that team. So it would have been like if we would have had that, it might have turned out a whole lot differently for a lot of people's lives too. Gary Harper was a part of that, and he's has his own business now and like helping a ton of people. Like there was a lot of good people up there where we were, and yeah, I wish looking back, like I could have helped in the fact of what we're doing now. But yeah, it was definitely interesting with some of these deals, and then being able to not see where the money was going until much later, until it's a red flag. That's what I love about a system to manage the money. Usually you have yellow flags along the way versus the red flags when it's like the deal is done and closed and like, shoot, we lost 200,000. It's more like, ah, shoot, like where are we right now with that property?
Right. Well, that's really good. Like everybody thinks it's so complicated. You have to track everything, but I mean, you broke it down to just a couple things: how much you're making, how much you're spending, how much you're keeping, and I mean, that's what it's all
if you
about.
if you know those numbers, you can sleep at night. How much did I make? Like legitimately make you'd be so surprised how many investors don't know those numbers. And like if you're an investor listening to this, like you're in the same category as probably 95% of the real estate investing world. How much did I make last month? How much did I spend last month? Did I keep any of it last month? And if you can't answer those questions, that's the first thing to get there, because you're going to make money in real estate, but you need to also become wealthy as well too. And a part of that is knowing where the money's going.
Yeah, that's great. That's such great insight. David, where can we get your book if we want to learn more about this and make sure that we
Sure.
don't make these $200,000 mistakes?
Right? It's on Amazon.com. So if you go there, Profit First for Real Estate Investing, it is a branch of the Mike Michalowicz book, the derivative of that. So if you've heard of Profit First, I'm not ripping off them. That it was an actual deal with Mike Michalowicz to do that. So it's Profit First for Real Estate Investing. Or if you go to simplecfo.com, that's where we have our podcast, our book. Like if you need more information there, that's where it can take you right to the book page as well. So just want to make sure people have that info.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, David. Thanks for bringing us your war stories, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, George. I really appreciate being able to share the first and the worst.
All right, man. We'll take you in another episode and see if you got another bad one for us.
I do, for sure. So.
Great. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. This is George Uno. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of First and Worst.